We're going to get done with this, end the controversy.
Turn up your radios.
Stop with the guesswork and the witch hunting and the speculation. Let's just find out who that op-ed writer is and what the reckoning should be. If anybody's going to know, it's Ronald Kessler. He's New York Times bestselling author of books on the Secret Service and the FBI and the CIA. And his latest, The Trump White House, Changing the Rules of the Game, where he had exclusive access to President Trump, the kind of access that Bob Woodward only wishes he had. Ron Kessler, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, great to be with you.
All right, tell us who it is.
You know, I actually fingered Mark Felt, the FBI official, as Woodward's deep throat source years before it came out. So I do have a good track record on this. And that was based on real information. I was going to interview Felt for one of my FBI books, and his daughter said, this guy Woodward was out here a year ago, and he came in a white limousine, and he had the limousine park 12 blocks away, and then he walked to our house. Well, that immediately told me, of course, this had to be deep throat. There was no way he would do that to conceal his source unless it was deep throat. But as for the anonymous New York Times op-ed, what I do say is that clearly this person is dishonest. Not because, I mean, obviously because of the fact that he did it, but secondly, in the op-ed, he says that that Trump constantly resisted imposing sanctions on Russia, or at least once or twice resisted. Well, then he never mentions that Trump did, in fact, not only impose sanctions, but took about half a dozen actions against Russia, such as sending missiles into Syria. It's a lie. Giving lethal defensive weapons to the Ukraine, increasing the oil output of the U.S., which reduces Russian profits, and that's a major part of their economy. Imposing sanctions on even Putin's oligarch friends, on and on and on. Doesn't mention any of that. So that tells you immediately this person is just a crank. And of course, every organization has people like that, disgruntled people who think they know more than their boss. And I think that's the end of that. As for the Woodward book, I sat next to Woodward and Bernstein during Watergate at the Washington Post. I thought they did an outstanding job. They only had one story that was incorrect. And typically, people who are quoted in his books claim that the quote was not true, and then years later they come forward, such as Colin Powell, and admit that, yes, they were behind these quotes. So I think a lot of the quotes may turn out to be true. A lot of them have previously appeared in the Washington Post or the New York Times. On the other hand, Woodward does not provide balance or context, and so his books give a misleading sort of clownish impression of the subject, whether it's a Republican or a Democrat, including Obama. And one example is that he presents the fact that Trump tweeted his decision to ban transgenders from the military. And the impression is that he just came out with this on his own, didn't consult with anybody. If there was any consultation, Woodward downplayed it. Well, in my book, The Trump White House, I do go into this, and it's quite the opposite. Actually, this initiative had been reviewed by the Principals Committee of the National Security Council, which includes Mattis and other cabinet officials beforehand, and they came up with these 4 different options. And in addition, Reince Priebus had discussed them with Trump beforehand. So the only thing that was different was that Trump tweeted his decision without telling Priebus. Well, so big deal. You know, of course we know that Trump is unorthodox, but in fact this had been had been very thoroughly reviewed beforehand. So that's an example of a misleading anecdote.
Yeah, and there's some passages in the book where he talks about situations, times, and meeting places, but doesn't name the source. And do you think that that's irresponsible?
No, this is the way journalism works. Unfortunately, people are not going to tell the truth, especially when it comes to the president, if they're going to be quoted on the record. The question is, what is the integrity of the writer? Woodward certainly was right about Deep Throat and Watergate, but the way he puts it all together is misleading and unfair. And I haven't seen a word of an allusion to the positive achievements of the Trump administration so far. For example, the former executive editor of the New York Times did a review of the book. There was not one, that was Jill Abramson. There was not one sentence that referred to the achievements of the Trump administration.
Well, that's because
incredible.
But the book is all about him being unfit for office. I mean, that's really the point of it. Just personally, how he comports himself, his intellectual capacity. I mean, that's the narrative the D.C. press corps wants to tell. It seems like that's the takeaway that Bob Woodward wants people to have from his book when he's warning about people need to understand what's going on in the White House. That's what he's intimating, isn't he?
And also scary.
Yeah, and that was something that Steve Bannon has been promoting, and totally false. All you have to do is look at your TV when Trump is holding a press conference or holding a cabinet meeting. He's totally on top of the subject. He's not detached, as Woodward says, detached from reality. No, just the opposite. He's very much in command. We know he issues these unsettling tweets, but all you have to do is believe your own eyes when you see him on TV.
Well, since you had exclusive and extended access to him for the book that you penned, The Trump White House: Changing the Rules of the Game, is the book. Anything during your time with him or in speaking with other sources for your book that concerned you, that rose to the levels we're discussing now of someone who is unfit for office?
No, just the opposite. He is totally, especially behind the scenes when he's not on TV. When I interviewed him at Mar-a-Lago, for example, he was his normal self, which is actually very measured, and he can be very deliberative when it comes to important decisions. And in my book, I go into how he made the decision to increase troop levels in Afghanistan. And that was a long process. He consulted not only his own advisors, but Army people who had been there, his own billionaire friends. He will even ask Secret Service agents or chambermaids for their opinion on some subjects. He actually is very deliberative, and I quote Reince Priebus as saying that in the book. And, of course, the important thing is not all this back and forth about who said what and, nasty comments that he does make sometimes about people and that other people make about him, but rather the results. And look at it. The economy is just bursting at the seams, and it's directly because of his actions, deregulating, cheering on business as opposed to Obama, who would demonize business, as well as getting rid of ISIS overseas. It's just endless.
All right, back to the leaker. Do you think it's possible? I mean, are any of your sources saying that it could have come out of Mike Pence's office?
No, and I know from experience that nobody ever guesses the source correctly. Nobody. I did know about Deep Throat because of actual information, but if you just go around guessing, you'll never find out. People typically will focus on someone who may have been critical or stand out in some way, and often it's not that person because that person doesn't want to take a chance on being the culprit. But it's important to note that the op-ed was identified as coming from someone in the Trump administration, which means the whole cabinet. It could be Undersecretary of Agriculture or Undersecretary of State. My guess is it will be State, because there was a lot of focus on foreign affairs, and the attack seemed to be in line with the State Department attitude.
You know what my guess is, Ron? And just
Yes.
I don't mean to brag on myself, but just to demonstrate how much of a three-dimensional thinker I am.
Oh,
I believe I'm the only one who has suggested this. It's a misdirection play, as you're sort of suggesting.
Oh.
It's Barron. Barron Trump penned that op-ed. And it's a way to set up.
It was an eighth grade essay he had to do.
Exactly. What I did on my summer vacation.
Yeah.
The way to set this up for his dad to properly utilize. I mean, it's genius.
And by the way, Barron is quite a guy. In my book, I describe what he's like. He treats his Secret Service agents with respect, unlike Jenna and Barbara Bush, who would try to lose them.
They just wanted to go drinking, okay?
Yeah, exactly.
They got
Party
their
girls.
drink on.
That.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
And then what else about Barron? Tell us about him. What does he do for fun?
He's like a mini Trump. He's like a grand maitre d' at Mar-a-Lago. He runs around talking to the guests. Have a great day, enjoy your breakfast, and
penning op-eds. Yeah.
And he's very concerned about the Secret Service and makes sure that they know where he's going and when he's going. So he's a real mensch.
All right.
Wow.
Yeah, one mensch. Boy, I hope I can grow up to be 11-year-old Barron someday. Ron Kessler, New York Times bestselling author of a number of books on the Secret Service, the FBI, the CIA, the latest, the Trump White House, changing the rules of the game. Ron, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Great to be with you.
Thanks. Barron sounds like Peyton and Eli, just a little different. And Ron Kessler joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
You're listening